Great, thank you. I appreciate it. I want to thank the Secretariat for inviting me to be here. I appreciate it, and for making sure that Indigenous representation is included in the work of the CBD. I also just want to make one quick note on the concept note. It indicates that I'm from IPLC, and I am an Indigenous person from North America, and I do not represent local communities. I represent Indigenous peoples. The IPLC construct is a structural problem that the UN needs to fix. I really appreciate the previous sessions and getting into more the details of the framework, but I want to talk a little bit more about some of the larger structural issues. When we think about biodiversity and Indigenous peoples, biodiversity is foundational to Indigenous peoples' rights and to the highest level of attainable standards. Our health systems depend on diverse plants, animals, water, and ecosystems for medicine, nutrition, and preventative care. So we must ensure that our rights are interpreted to include these ecological conditions that are required to sustain Indigenous health systems. The right for health is not just about biomedical services, but it's about our rights to biodiversity and the environment. Article 24 of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples affirms these inherent rights to traditional medicine and health practices, and this includes the right to protect medicinal species, habitats, and associated knowledge systems. Biodiversity loss, criminalization of practices, and biopiracy constitute direct violation of these rights and a threat to the health of modern Earth. And it's one of our frameworks, our Indigenous Determinants of Health frameworks, seminal pillars. As referenced in CBD 1619, the Indigenous Determinants of Health framework is particularly useful for operationalizing the rights established in the UN Declaration. It provides a practical bridge between biodiversity protection, health obligations, governance, food systems, and cultural continuity. We have proposed that CBD explicitly align the Global Biodiversity Framework implementation with the Indigenous Determinants of Health framework to ensure coherence with international human rights and health commitments. There's two major concerns regarding Indigenous issues and biodiversity at the global level, and these are both pillars. The first is the fragmentation across UN processes. It undermines Indigenous rights and outcomes. Indigenous health and biodiversity are addressed across multiple forums, including CBD, FCCC, the Permanent Forum, WIPO, WHO, as well as the WHO Traditional Medicine initiatives. A lack of coordination leads to duplication, inconsistent standards, and the inability of Indigenous peoples to participate meaningfully in all of the mechanisms. These gaps in protection for Indigenous rights and knowledge must be addressed. And the second issue that I see is what I mentioned at the beginning. The continued conflation of Indigenous peoples with local communities. Merging Indigenous peoples who are rights holders with stakeholder groups is detrimental to Indigenous peoples' collective rights as affirmed under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This conflation significantly weakens accountability across UN mechanisms and processes. What we need to uphold these rights, first, we need structured coordination among these UN mechanisms and processes to ensure consistent recognition. Second, we need clear and consistent separation of Indigenous peoples from local communities. We are starting to see some movement finally in regards to this across the UN system. We see the establishment now of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus within the Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. I hope that other mechanisms can also see this and begin to make those adjustments. Third, we need full implementation of free, prior, informed consent or some better fitting mechanism in conservation and climate in order to ensure protections of Indigenous knowledge, data, and medicines from extraction, misappropriation, and commercialization without consent. And then fourth, we need to see direct and sustainable financing for Indigenous-led biodiversity, health, and knowledge transition initiatives. I really see this as an opportunity now for action and alignment Integrating Indigenous rights, governance, and health systems is not an academic exercise, but a necessary condition to achieve the objectives of the Convention and the Global Biodiversity Framework. Indigenous people are already safeguarding most of the world's biodiversity, and upholding our rights is essential to sustaining both planetary and human health. Thank you.
Thank you very much.